w kontekście tego, co ja im przekażę tutaj ze szczytu NATO, z jego atmosfery, z jego postanowień, z rozmów kuluarowych, które tutaj są toczone, no jest według mnie istotne dla budowania takiej jedności polskiej sceny politycznej w kwestii, która, nie mam żadnych wątpliwości, dla naszych rodaków jest najważniejsza, a mianowicie bezpieczeństwa naszego, zarówno tego wewnętrznego, jak i zewnętrznego, więc tak, oczywiście mam nadzieję, że to posiedzenie Rady Bezpieczeństwa Narodowego odbędzie się i to jak najszybciej. Proszę Państwa, no, rozmowy z panem premierem Rishim Sunakiem sprowadzają się do bieżącej współpracy w tej chwili między Wielką Brytanią a Polską. No, jesteśmy dzisiaj na szczycie NATO, więc przede wszystkim dyskutowaliśmy o kwestiach wspólnych programów zbrojeniowych. Pamiętajmy Narew, Miecznik, plany na przyszłość. To były te zasadnicze kwestie, o których mówiliśmy wczoraj z panem premierem. Ta współpraca układa się bardzo dobrze. Rozmawialiśmy oczywiście także i o kwestii przyszłego członkostwa Ukrainy w NATO i o tym, w jaki sposób wspomagamy Ukrainę. Też pamiętajcie Państwo, że zarówno Wielka Brytania, jak i Polska są absolutnie w awangardzie donatorów Ukrainy. To my mówię w sensie zarówno Brytyjczycy, jak i my Polacy przekazaliśmy jak do tej pory na Ukrainę, oczywiście po Stanach Zjednoczonych, najwięcej sprzętu i ta pomoc z naszej strony jest największa, więc także i o tych kwestiach rozmawialiśmy. Poruszyliśmy ten temat, jakiejś długiej dyskusji w tej kwestii wczoraj nie było. Zobaczymy dzisiaj, pamiętajmy, że mamy gości na dzisiejszej sesji, która jest podzielona na dwie części. W pierwszej części mamy kraje z Dalekiego Wschodu, mamy kraje obszaru azjatycko-pacyficznego, czyli Nową Zelandię, czyli Australię, Japonię, Koreę Południową. I będziemy na pewno dyskutowali o tych kwestiach, które dotyczą tej części świata i w związku z tym bezpieczeństwa również i całego świata, bo wszyscy przecież znakomicie wiedzą, że to przede wszystkim dotyczy relacji z Chinami, prawda? I sytuacji, która tam potencjalnie może się rozwinąć. No ale to jest tak, że to tak zwane globalne południe, czyli Afryka i wpływy zarówno rosyjskie, jak i chińskie w Afryce, więc na pewno te tematy będą dyskutowane, ale z drugiej strony ta druga część to jest właśnie spotkanie z Ukrainą i w tym kontekście dokładnie właśnie wschodniej flanki, przyszłości Ukrainy, zagrożeń dla Ukrainy. No, pamiętajmy, że jednym z tych hipotetycznych zagrożeń w tej chwili jest także i potencjalna obecność najemników z grupy Wagnera na Białorusi, którzy, no kto wie, być może mają służyć temu, by stwarzać kolejne zagrożenie właśnie dla Ukrainy od północy. In my opinion, it's absolutely not enough. I hope that in a few years, Ukraine will be the full member of our alliance, of NATO.
Why was it not possible to give a clear pathway to Ukraine?
You know, I think that this path is clear now after all this decision we made yesterday. So we can say that that decision is made. Oh, the timetable is, you know, it's very difficult and it's practically impossible, taking into account that we need unity to make the decision, yes, in NATO, to talk about the full membership of Ukraine now. That we can decide that Ukraine will be the member of NATO, I don't know, tomorrow, yes, because there is war. During the war, it's impossible. Taking into account the Article 5 of NATO and collective defense. we would like to discuss this issue with G7 countries because this is really important element of the future cooperation and support for Ukraine. We will talk about it, I hope. Thank you very much. Dziękuję bardzo.
Good morning, everyone. This is an important meeting. It's extremely important to stick together to support Ukraine as much as we can. We have, together with NATO, the EU, an excellent cooperation, and we are working a lot in order for the EU to become more and more a security provider in full coordination with NATO. It's also very important to make very clear that we want to be extremely united and that we are ready to provide security guarantees to Ukraine and to participate in all the efforts. We also support the Just Peace the Just Peace formula proposed by Volodymyr Zelensky, based on the UN Charter, based on justice. There is no place for impunity. L'Union européenne et l'OTAN, nous sommes extrêmement unis dans ces temps extrêmement difficiles pour soutenir l'Ukraine autant qu'il est possible. L'Union européenne soutient l'Ukraine avec des moyens financiers, avec des moyens humanitaires, avec des moyens politiques. C'est la reconnaissance du statut de candidat pour l'Ukraine et avec des moyens militaires. La facilité paix, la formation des militaires ukrainiens sont autant d'exemples de la détermination de l'Union européenne de travailler en complémentarité étroite avec l'OTAN pour faire en sorte que l'on défende les mêmes valeurs, que l'on défende la Charte des Nations Unies et la souveraineté. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. So, we will continue today. I think the experience we got yesterday, I'm in Finland, being first time full member, that was a very positive meeting, and we are expecting, like we yesterday were talking, to have our good neighbor Sweden alongside us as soon as possible. Today we have a possibility of meeting President Zelensky, and I guess that will be a very interesting, profound discussion.
Presidentti Niinistö, Zelenski tuntui olevan eilen kovin pettynyt siihen, että NATO toimii, ja hän sanoi, että nämä epämääräiset jäsenyyslupaukset pelasivat Venäjän pussiin. Miten kommentoitte?
Tapasin hänet eilen illalla myöhemmin ja varmasti odotukset niin hänellä kuin Ukrainassa yleensä ovat olleet tietysti suuriakin, ja sitä taustaa vasten ehkä tuo ensireaktio jollain tavalla on ymmärrettävä. Katsotaan nyt sitten tänään, mitä hän tänään sanoo.
Puolan Duda sanoi, että hänen mielestään nämä Naton toimet eivät olleet riittäviä. Mikä on Suomen presidentin kanta?
Tässähän on keskusteltu pitkin matkaa ja on ollut jonkin verran erilaisia näkemyksiä, niin kuin presidentti Duda on sitten kerrannut. Kuitenkin varmasti hänkin on pitänyt yhtenäistä mielipidettä, että sellainen kyetään rakentamaan hyvin tärkeänä. Minä olen todennut hyvin selvästi, että nyt tavoitteena pitäisi olla se, että kaikki tavoin edistetään ja avustetaan Ukrainaa tavoittamaan ne kriteerit, jotka NATO on asettanut. Tämä edistäminen ja tavoittaminen on tietysti toimintaa, joka antaa sitten mahdollisuuksia myöskin ehkä tietynlaiseen väljyyteen. Nyt tietysti tässä uudessa tilanteessa on erittäin tärkeää siinä mielessä, että Euroopassa, Ukrainassa on sotatila. On erittäin tärkeää, että NATO asettautuu tietyllä tavalla uuteen raamiin, ja sitä näissä suunnitelmissa haetaan. Kyllä se on Suomelle tietysti erittäin tärkeä ja totta kai me olemme nyt sitten suunnitelmissa hyvin kiinteänä osana. Kyllä oikeastaan kaikki kokemukset nyt vuoden ajalta osoittavat, että kyllä siinä puhutaan minimitasosta. On vaan havahduttava siihen, että sellainen pysyvä rauhantila, johon me ehkä tuudittaudumme, ei se olekaan annettu asia.
Presidentti Niinistö, NATO ei voi antaa turvatakuita Ukrainalle sodan aikana, mutta G7-maat tulevat tänään ilmeisesti jonkinlaiset takuut antamaan. Miten tämä on mahdollista, että yksi voi antaa ja toinen ei?
Ymmärtääkseni G7-maat tulevat puhumaan sellaisilla otsakkeilla kuin security assurance, joka on vähän eri asia kuin guarantees. Hyvä, kiitoksia.
Good morning, everybody. And today we have a historic Ukraine NATO Council coming up. Yesterday we did render some decisions regarding the pathway of Ukraine to NATO. There was, of course, a frustration on the Ukrainian side. Understandably, Ukraine wants to have the peace that NATO's umbrella is bringing for our country, for example. But it is very important that all the allies are behind this decision and we go and start this process to take Ukraine into NATO. As I've said before, I really do believe that Ukraine's place is in NATO. Being in NATO is ending the grey zones that are sources of conflict and wars, what we want to achieve. Yesterday, for us, a very important decision regarding the new defense plans. These plans were adopted, and that means that we are really ready to defend our country from the first inch, from the first moment. And now it's also the first inch from the first moment. And now it's also up to all the allies to increase the defense expenditure in order to really fill those plans with real substance. And I'm really glad that everybody agreed to the obligation of 2% of GDP in defense investments. And also joining, Sweden joining NATO is very good for the security of our region, because now it's not the Suwalki gap that the Baltic countries' defense depends on, but the help can come from the other side as well, and this is making this whole region more secure. Today we're going to discuss with 4 good partners: Australia, New Zealand, Japan and South Korea. This war has shown that the countries that have the same values that we have here will join and really support Ukraine every possible way. And we have other challenges. Security of ours is not regional but global. Cybersecurity issues, information war that is going on, and there is a lot that we all share. Thank you. As I said before, we were not saying that Ukraine should join while the war is going on. Nobody asked that. Nobody was demanding that, and never has. Even Ukraine hasn't. Everybody understands that they can't join while the war is going on. It is important that we agreed this process. The foreign ministers will nudge this process annually, seeing where it is going. Of course, a lot of words in the text, but what is important is that we can't draft Ukraine into NATO. We have to have concrete steps that take Ukraine into NATO, and we have those steps agreed so that we can fulfill all the conditions, and when the opportunity window opens, like it did for us, it might be a very short period of time when Ukraine has pushed Russia back to Russia and they have the opportunity to join NATO, then we should do it really fast, because it's the only security guarantee, that it's the cheapest, and is actually deterring Russia from further aggression. We don't see that, but of course the question is, there's a lot of frustration that the war is going on and everybody wants to have peace, but what we are talking about is sustainable peace, and sustainable peace has few elements, and one of those is accountability, for example, whether the Russians are held accountable for the crimes committed, and there are other elements in the peace plan as well. So we can talk about peace then, and when there is peace, of course, we can also continue with the membership of NATO of Ukraine.
Those security guarantees that Ukraine is preparing to get into, do you trust them, considering that they already have a Budapest memorandum of work?
In the Budapest memorandum, and there were security assurances, and Russia was also part of them, so they were not keeping their promises. Now it is the bilateral agreements that Ukraine has with different countries, so that we are giving them military aid to help them to defend themselves, and this is what we actually do. So writing this down gives them, assurance that when the change in leadership comes in some countries, because we have elections, then it doesn't change the obligation of a country to support Ukraine. I think this is actually very important, because the difference between Russia and democratic countries is that the Western countries keep their promises. And I think that is also very important regarding yesterday's decision, is that all the allies want to be behind those words, so that these are not only words but also deeds to take Ukraine into NATO. So that's why all the words were looked into so deeply and with so much detail. Well, as long as Lukashenko is leading the country, we have considered Belarus as a co-aggressor in this war, because they have been acting together with Russia, and this is how we deal with them. Okay, thank you.
на која што, како што и беше очекувано, се потврди единството во НАТО Алијансата. При тоа сите го поздравивме влегувањето на Финска како 31-ва членка и чекорот кој што е направен пред финално влегување во Алијансата на Шведска. Исто така беа донесени многу важни одлуки. Првата во однос на продолжувањето на поддршката на Украина, второ во однос на подготовката на безбедносни планови на регионално ниво, во однос на финансирањето, при што беше донесена одлука за 2% од бруто домашниот производ да биде минимум издвојување за одбраната, при што 20% најмалку да бидат за модернизација. И исто така голема одлука беше донесена и во однос на проширувањето на соработката на НАТО земјите во делот на сајбер безбедноста и во делот на хибридните закани кои што ги гледаме околу нас. Денес продолжуваме со две други сесии. Првата е со нашите партнери од Индо-Пацифичкиот регион. Тука со нас се присутни Австралија, Нов Зеланд, Јужна Кореја и Јапан, на кои што ќе ги споделиме најважните аспекти на заедничкото делување во однос на обезбедувањето на мирот во светот во овој нов геополитички момент. На состанокот ќе присуствуваат и председателката на Европската комисија и председателот на Европскиот совет, на кој што исто така ние представниците, председателите и премиерите на земјите од Западен Балкан ќе го реафирмираме и ставот за важноста на европските и евроатлантските интеграции за мирот, безбедноста, стабилноста и просперитетот на овој многу важен регион и за НАТО, меѓутоа и за Европската Унија. ќе одржам и билатерална средба со премиерот на Грција и исто така ќе продолжи и втората сесија за денес, која што се однесува на првиот состанок на Советот НАТО Украина, на кој што ќе разговараме за подетално во однос на поддршката која што НАТО ја дава на Украина, меѓутоа и за чекорите кои што ќе бидат направени во иднина, се со цел поголемо приближување на Украина кон НАТО. Вчера бевте информирани од страна на генералниот секретар дека веќе е донесен нов план во однос на приближувањето на Украина. Она што беше пристапување во 2 чекори сега е во поедноставена процедура и дека наредните чекори и одлуки ќе зависат од консензусот и од одлуките, како и од ситуацијата на теренот која што ќе ја донесат земјите членки на НАТО. Ви благодарам.
and we are supposed to sit in our seats. And there are 9 names of the countries in front of you. The sooner you are able to find your seats, the sooner we can start, and the sooner we end.
Dangerous for us, because then the message will be to all authoritarian leaders that when they use military force, when they violate international law, when they invade another country, they get what they want. And that will make the world even more dangerous, and we will become more vulnerable. So it's in our security interest to support Ukraine, and that's the reason why I also welcome the very strong support from NATO allies. Let me add one more thing, and that is that what we also see now is that allies are investing more in defense. We just published the latest figures a couple of days ago. 8.3% real increase in defense spending across Europe and Canada. It's the biggest in decades. And it shows that allies are now also taking this extremely seriously and investing more in defense to ensure both our collective defense, but also our ability to continue to support Ukraine.
I think we have a couple of minutes for questions from the audience. There are microphone stands, I think, on either side. Yes, sir, but please go to the microphone. Oh, it's in the center. I'm sorry.
Yeah, hello, Oleksiy Goncharenko, member of the Parliament of Ukraine. First of all, thank you very much for all you said in support of our country. But the most important from the ground, I can tell you, millions of Ukrainians are looking to Vilnius today with hope. We want to see the word invitation or to invite from NATO to Ukraine. And I have a direct question to you. Will it happen? And because that will boost morale of Ukrainians enormously. If this will not happen, that will be really demoralizing.
And I think
thank you very much.
And thank you, sir. I think.
My question, that's a very important topic, climate, environment, definitely. And don't you think that this conception of that NATO will protect every inch of its territory, when we're speaking about environment, it shows us that it's impossible, that it's outdated when we are just speaking about NATO territory. Just for example, if Russia will attack any NATO country, I hope this will not happen, with a missile, just compare the consequences if Russia will destroy a nuclear power plant in Ukraine on the border with NATO country. What will be the consequences? They are incomparable at all. So maybe there is in time to have a discussion that Article 5 should be expanded And will it be attack really on the NATO states, countries, if something like this will happen? We saw in Ukraine Kakhovka Dam catastrophe, planetary scale catastrophe with the huge consequences for the Black Sea. It's to Turkey, Bulgaria, Romania, NATO states. And what is the reaction? And if we will not have the mechanism of reaction on such events, so how can we in reality protect every inch of NATO territory? Thank you.
Okay, and before you go, number 3, Sherry, you take question 1. David, you take the second question that we've just had. Okay, and your question, please.
Hello, Itse de Vries. I'm a researcher on energy security at the Dutch Army and also part of a youth delegation here on climate security. My question is about interoperability and future energy sources. So in the future, I can imagine that we'll have electric military equipment or biofuels or synthetic fuels. So how can the NATO standardize this so that we don't have a future in which we all run our vehicles on different fuels or electricity? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's start with question 1, Sherry.
Okay, first I want to recognize this group of climate security young leaders here. We just had a question from there, a half a dozen or more of them that are here, and they are the next generation leaders in this field. I am so proud of them, and I know they represent a much larger cohort that is leading and ensuring that we will address the climate crisis as a serious threat. And that's part of the answer, to the first question, which is, we are moving towards, we are addressing, and there's a very ambitious program in place in the United States now to move towards net zero. Our militaries are doing their part. All the military departments in the U.S. have very ambitious climate strategies with net zero goals, moving towards microgrids at every military base to enable using a diverse source of energy, as well as secure energy and island energy when necessary, which is important so it meets both the climate and energy security goals at the same time. There are a number of sectors where the military moving towards electrification of vehicles and more charging stations can begin to make a real difference in moving civilian society as well as technology innovation, both on batteries and on solar, on baseload solar for housing and many other areas where the needs of the military and civilian society align. So I would say that we're working within NATO, as part of NATO, to address that. And I think that we have a very good baseline moving forward, recognizing that we have a lot of threats right here on the doorstep that we need to face at the same time.
David?
Yeah, on the question of Article 5, it's of course a good one. If we look at the environmental consequences of the war in Ukraine, they're huge. Look at the Kakhovka Dam that was blown. We've figured out what the long-term impact of that is in desertification, in the loss of food production, in the immediate impact on humans and cattle. It's enormous. And if something would happen to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, that would be a huge disaster. So I fully agree that these are huge challenges that we're facing at the moment. When it comes down to Article 5, it is not the case that only a missile attack on one of our nations can trigger Article 5. We've already stated that cyber attacks or malicious cyber campaigns can trigger Article 5. An attack in space could trigger Article 5. Hybrid attacks could trigger Article 5. So it's not a set case that Article 5 could never apply to something that would have a huge impact on our security but doesn't happen on our territory. Just to say that's already an option that will be available. When it comes down to interoperability, the third question, I really, really like it. And it's at the heart of what we do at NATO, which is making sure that we are interoperable and that you don't come with your electric vehicle and then figure out that your ally is working on hydrogen and you can't plug in. Or the US electric system is different than the European one, and that means that the vehicles are not interchangeable. We really want to be at the forefront of those questions. So our leaders yesterday endorsed the decision to let us work on an energy transition for the military by design. And what we mean by that is that we want to look at what is the ultimate mix of energy that the military will use in airplanes, in rolling vehicles, in trucks, in ships, in unmanned vehicles, in camps, in barracks, and make sure that we come to the optimum solution that gives us the best operational effectiveness, that reduces our dependencies and doesn't create new ones, as was already discussed by my two neighbors, and that we do it all in a coherent way. We all use the same fuel now, and we should all use the same energy in the future. So we know that we can find each other on the battlefield when we need to.
Minister, if you also wouldn't mind just weighing in on the Article 5 point. I saw you nodding your head as David was speaking there. And then, General, if you could also just say something about the interoperability question as well. So, Minister, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I was nodding. I don't have much to add to what has already been said, but it's just an important point that it's not only missiles, and as has been stated, it can also be other kinds, such as hybrids, such as cyber. But of course, that it's also, it's a development that today it's in wording. It hasn't really been, tested. And if it would be tested, it's always, a political decision, which makes it, a challenge, but also interesting to try to understand what would happen and in execution what Article 5 truly means. But just regarding the third question, it's, this is. We would not be able to have like one solution for everyone, but we of course need to be able to plug in. And when it comes to policies and for example incentives within governments and countries, I think it's important that they're technically and technologically neutral. So we're not choosing one from another. But what is also interesting is that, for example, when you look at e-fuel, I mean, you need a lot of electricity to produce that. So what I find interesting, and I'm just a lawyer and a politician, so I'm not going to pretend that I understand all the technology. But if you need so much electricity in producing certain kinds of solutions, and then you list up everything that needs to go through energy transition, where would that rank? And how likely is it that solution would be the one? And I say as a politician, that's not something that politicians should decide. That needs to be the sectors, the people that are innovating and investing, that needs to figure out the best solution. The market needs to do that, but of course we need to have a clear policy on where we're heading. So we think.
General.
Yes, interoperability is of course a key issue for the efficiency of the armed forces, and interoperability in the field is linked to the interoperable procedures beside interoperability of devices and equipment. In this regard, we have to consider a point which was raised earlier, the fact that armed forces are going to be challenged more and more with, let's say, civil protection tasks. This will bring the need to adopt national procedures rather than NATO procedures, which will make a challenge when they find themselves operating in the international environment. It could be useful to exploit best practices throughout the allies, and also in this field, I think the scientific community could help to find the best way to look at the efficiency of devices and equipment.
Right. Do we have more questions in the room? Right. One. I did see another hand on this side, or not? Somebody take their hand down. Two. Okay, let's take those two.
Hi, thank you so much for these very interesting thoughts and reflections. I'm curious to hear more about the new Climate and Security Center of Excellence and the opportunity that presents for obviously collaboration within NATO, but perhaps beyond NATO as well, and how NATO member states can work with other partners on the climate issue.
Thank you.
Hello, Andrea Cameron, U.S. Naval War College. Yesterday, we were talking about Diana and how that is funding innovation within NATO, and I was wondering if you could kind of bridge the gap of how innovation is going to meet with climate change and if that's being considered in Diana-sponsored projects. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you, Andrea and Elsa, for your good questions. I'll start with Andrea's first on Diana. I know you're going to have the chair of the Diana Fund, Barbara McQuiston, on the next panel, and she and I did have a chance to speak earlier, and I think there's a lot of opportunity both in energy technology innovation and in climate technology innovation. One of the important gaps that we need to bridge as we take climate science and turn it into operational decision-making tools for militaries is to bridge what we call the 1 to 10 year gap. We have very good weather prediction now, and we have good long-term global climate models. There's a gap in the middle that's often referred to as the 1 to 10 year gap, where you want to make decisions about planning an exercise or next year's military operation, or what's going to happen, what's the flooding going to look like in Pakistan next year, and you need to have more fidelity on that information, and that's a combination of downscaling global climate models to a regional scale, and then extending out other types of models and new air-sea interactions and other types of tools that are becoming available. And I think that's going to be an important area of climate technology and of improved predictive capabilities that I would love to see Diana invest in for NATO's benefit. And Elsa asked if I could just comment on the Canadian sponsored Center of Excellence, which I've had the privilege to visit with in Montreal as they stand up. I think there's a really important role to play in the education and training and building out the awareness pillar for NATO, and in expanding the offerings, a variety of education and training tools that will bring more capability across NATO member nations.
Yeah, let me start by echoing the last point. I mean, centers of excellence are a great added value to the work that we can do at headquarters, because it brings together specialists on a voluntary basis by nations that really provide input to the policy that we make. For example, the Energy Security Center of Excellence here in Lithuania provided a critical input on the energy assessment of how we're using energy now in an operational context. So I'm looking forward to the launch of the Center of Excellence this afternoon, and the Canadian government will sign the MOU then, and I'll be proud to be present there, and we're looking forward to it being stood up. On Diana and the NATO Innovation Fund, innovation has been mentioned, is going to be key in this whole energy transition. And I was lucky as well to be also part of the founding of both Diana and the NATO Innovation Fund. Yeah. So we made sure that in both the Charter of Diana and in the LPA, the Limited Partnership Agreement of the NATO Innovation Fund, green is one of the founding principles. And green tech will be key for the investments of the fund, but also the projects and the challenges that Diana will run. There will be a panel on Diana and then if later on, so I don't want to spoil too much. But one of the pilot challenges that has been launched by Diana is in the field of energy resilience and in energy storage. So that's a testimony to how we're really looking into new tech to help us in this transition.
General, you wanted to tackle that as well.
With regard to the Climate Change Center of Excellence, we as Italy have proposed to participate to the Center of Excellence without deploying personnel, but just using our operation room of the Italian Weather Forecast Center of Excellence in Italy, where we have sensors, we have link with satellite, meteorological satellite, and we can also provide the link to the World Meteorological Organization, but also to the EUMETSAT, which is the organization for the exploitation of meteorological satellite, in regard to the models for the outside, for overseas operations, where we can put together different models at a global level and focus on the specific region, as you were saying earlier.
Minister, I just want to give you this question that's come through from a member of the online audience. How might the energy transition impact NATO's mission in critical infrastructure protection and energy security?
Could you repeat that?
So how might the energy transition impact NATO's mission in critical infrastructure protection and energy security? Could the energy transition be a driver for improved security?
Absolutely, but it could also, not be. And that's why I mentioned that it is extremely important to have a clear understanding on what our decisions mean. And if we decide to do A, we at some point also need to decide to do B. Yeah. Because if we already decided that we want to become net zero, that we want to go to alternative, for example, energy production, or use and then use equipment that needs these raw materials, we need to understand, where are we going to get them? What does that mean? Is there will we be, dependent on countries that we do not want to be dependent on? Because we've done that in the past and it didn't go so great, and we should not repeat that with the next thing. So it could definitely, it will have an effect. It could be a positive one. It could also be a negative one, and it's up to us to make it a positive one. But for that to happen, we need to understand, and we need to be ready to do what it takes to get there. And again, there you have to understand the geopolitical situation. You have to decide on up to how much do you want to have, businesses or dependencies on like-minded nations and not. And also you would have to have, there will be a lot of interest and lobbyism, and you have to be ready to tackle that. And that, for politicians, that's often quite the challenge to do so.
Any more questions in the House? We're down to the last 5 minutes. Going, gone. David, there's one more from the online audience for you. How do you see circular economy implementation into NATO's security vision?
What I would like is that with everything we do, everything we build, every field of expertise, whether it's economy, development cooperation, financial, that we think about security. And I'll give you an example, that after the sabotage of Nord Stream 2, we sat down with a lot of the undersea infrastructure owners, and we asked them, what is your risk matrix when it comes down to sabotage? And it was not part of their risk matrix. I sometimes joke that bank directors are the people that I can relate to the most, because they know that everybody wants what they have. So they're geared towards malintent. But a lot of the things that we have, our energy infrastructure, our financial system, our logistic supply lines, are geared towards economic principles. So I think that as we change our economy to a more sustainable economy, as we transition to more sustainable forms of energy, we need to think about security. One example on that, we're building huge wind farms in the North Sea now. That means that a significant part of our energy will come through a few cables that are lying on the seabed. We need to think about how do we protect that infrastructure, because it's part of our critical energy infrastructure. And that needs to happen across the board, and we have the expertise to help, so we're ready to engage with all those communities.
And I think we'll leave it on that note. Did you want to add in there, Sherry? Or?
Well, the circular economy concept for militaries harks back to a concept we call life cycle cost, sort of understanding the full life cycle of the weapon system. And, over the last 20 plus years, militaries have gone a long way to understand what that logistics tail is. And we learned the hard way in Iraq and Afghanistan that logistics tail was dragging down the fighting tooth when we were losing soldiers as they were convoying fuel to the front. So now we've sort of re-engineered how we think about energy in a contested logistics environment, and that will also help us better understand the whole life cycle for our acquisition system.
Thanks very much. And now I think we can really leave it here. A massive thank you to everybody, especially my panelists, to Minister Gilfitolo, to David of NATO, Sherry, and of course, General Bayone. Thank you to our online audience for your engagement and your questions, as well as those of you who've been in the House. And I hope to continue the conversation at another point. Thanks very much, everybody, and that's where we'll leave it.